way, we have the Two of Wands. This is from our Gentle Tarot. And for Wands, she's created like this cute little sprout of like wheat, you know, so she's holding the two wheat. And I think in this in this interpretation, she says, I leave doubt behind, trust in myself, and create my own path. Does anyone have the Rider-Waite or the Thoth as well?
Yes, I have both. So Rider-Waite is this dude standing on the edge of his dominion on a little sort of terracey type situation. And he's holding a globe in his hand, so probably making some kind of plans for an adventure, for venturing out of this little region that he's in. He's got one wand in his hand, in his left hand, in front of him, and then one behind him, which is interesting. He doesn't seem to be paying much attention to the one behind him. And in the distance, we can see mountains and water and generally like the wild. And then slightly less figurative, as is typical of the Thoth, we have two of those, I think it's pronounced dorje, those thunderbolt things from Tibetan Buddhism, crossed over. And, you know, they're generally representing sort of like ignition and will. And then we have, I think, the symbol for men.
Mars? Mars and Aries, it looks like. It's at the bottom.
It's
very nice, yeah.
So we're really going into the fire thing, because of course Wands is considered the fiery suit. So yeah, fire, fire, fire. It's interesting, adventure. I was thinking that before Issa was talking about adventures. But I feel like that's what's going on. Well, it's not quite what's going on. It's the plans going on here.
This is very interesting because I've been recently reading The Sacred and the Profane. And one of the kind of, just in the beginning, one of the kind of themes that he's talking about, or the symbols that he's talking about, is the staff and how it reaches to heaven and also connects to earth. And this is how humans define the center of their universe. So it's interesting, like you said, that he's got the one behind him too. So there's something also, I don't know, is that his past intentions, or what do we make of the staff that's kind of not being such a focal point?
Well, I tend to think of the twos as, you know, like deciding between two things. So my quite simplistic interpretation is that one wand represents staying at home and one represents going on adventure. The one here, the one behind him is bolted to the wall, so he can't take that one with him. It's like a little. I mean, you can't see, but trust me. But I think it's really interesting because if all the wands in the whole deck are made from branches, then they could all be branches from what you're talking about, from the Irminsul, from the world tree. And the wands is kind of like as I said, ignition, will, that like the life force that flows up through us each as individuals, but then like through the central world tree that is the center of our whole universe, mythologically speaking. And I like the idea of all of the wands being branches of that tree. That's beautiful. And then it was sort of like all of our own individual energy is kind of coming from that one central pool. I'm just mixing my metaphors wildly now, but you know what I mean? Like it's all coming up from one thing, maybe. Like the thing that turns us on. Not like that. Like
small. I was going to say that symbol is very phallic. Those wands drawn on there are extremely phallic looking.
Yes, they are, aren't they?
They are.
But I don't think that's coincidence. I think like the will is very phallic. It's associated. The will. Let's not go down.
No, we might need to go down there. I'm like,
I just meant turns us on as in like wakes us up to consciousness, like makes us not dead matter, not just meat. Right? There's something looking out of my eyes. That spark. I mean, like I don't know. Maybe that all comes. Obviously, I don't know. No one knows where that comes from. But I don't think it's crazy to speculate. And I know, obviously, it's a tradition in many traditions to speculate that comes from one source that ignites us all. And I love the idea of that being the world tree. But then the world tree itself is pretty phallic.
I don't remember if I heard this in a presentation a few days ago or I read it in some book, because I've been reading way too many different things these days. But it was something about jewelry, like traditional jewelry and stuff. And this, I think, ethnologist or anthropologist or someone, he classified them as in either jewelry is circular, either it's vertical, or either it's a sort of vector, like it's something that connects point A to point B. So those kind of, you can see it in some places where people have like nose rings that connect to the ear and things like that. And I guess it makes me wonder, because I feel like a lot of those exist in that form across any culture because they're very linked to the human body. So the circularity, I think, is just like, okay, around our extremities or whatever. But then the vertical thing, I wonder how much it is also to highlight some sort of thing of the human body itself, or of us like standing up and connecting what is under us and what is above us, and this sort of like channel. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I wonder how much there's like, there's this world tree or whatever you want to call it, and then how humans can be like a little fractal of that in a way, just because of how vertical we are, or can be. We don't always are, but and I just thought that was interesting, because I think this text was specifically about ritual things and the things that were used for rituals, and so it's also that, and it also had that connection between the sacred and the profane, because basically, at least according to this nice book, the rites of passage, that's kind of what he's talking about, how it's all about bridging between the sacred and profane, and that's where these things appear. So yeah, just like different things that are popping up based on what we're talking about. So maybe it's not phallic, maybe it's just human.
Yeah, immediately when I saw the Rider-Waite card, it evoked this poem by David White about the bird and the blackbill. And basically the poem talks about someone being in kind of the temple or the church. And so hearing the sound of the temple, like the bell, the church bell, but then also hearing the blackbird call. And so it's sort of this reflection on the longing to sort of go in and to sort of stay, to sort of contemplate, to reflect, to self-reflect. And then the call of the blackbird to go out into the world, to explore, to put one's body into space. And noticing that oscillation within myself, it's like wanting whatever I don't have in a lot, many times, if I'm meditating or still, I want to, like, my mind wants me to go out and move. And then when I'm moving, a lot of times I want to come back and come inside and be still. And so, that longing to extend myself. And, that's kind of what I thought, seeing this guy like holding the world and kind of like, but it's cool. He's like holding the whole world in his hand. But maybe for me, that's there's the staff that wants to go out, and then there's the staff that wants to stay.
Another thing that's been really coming up for me, I mean, with so in class, one thing they keep teaching us is don't separate the front side from the back side. Like a lot of people, especially with jewelry and stuff, like if you make a brooch or something, like you focus so much on what is public, and then the back side is just like, well, you glued a pin or whatever, and that's it. And like they keep encouraging us to think of it as a whole thing. And separately today, I was reading about buildings, and this guy Christopher Alexander, which I think Bonnie talks about a lot. He was talking about how the outside of a building shapes the inside, and the inside shapes the outside. Like the private realm and the public realm shape each other at the same time. So I don't think it's like I'm here and then I'm there. It's like you're kind of always in both. It just depends which side you're looking at it from. And if like this thing protrudes into one side, then there's like some degree of equal thing that goes the other way, and it's like this weird yin yang. And I think that's kind of exactly what you were saying.
It reminds me of this thing that like I find myself doing sometimes. Especially in times of high stress, I just close my eyes, which is not good if you're learning to drive, by the way. My driving instructor did not appreciate this. But it's just this weird, like, suddenly you can be completely alone in the infinite darkness, even though you're out in the world. It's like a weird, it feels like a trick. It's like, and it also feels a bit like, you can't catch me. I'm going in now. Like, if something scary is happening or bad or stressful, you can just close your eyes and no one can make you open them. I don't know. I'm just thinking about the inside and the outside thing, and this weirdness of how like that, like the place that Holly's talking about, like the silent, quiet, contemplative, still place. You can go there anytime. We just like don't think about it. So maybe it's like a false choice that he's having to make between going out and staying in.
So there's that whole part where he's talking about how you can be kind of like, and he says it in different words, but a resident of a city, meanwhile you're also a resident of a state, meanwhile you're also a resident of the country or whatever it is. And so there's these concentric circles in which you are central. And so that whole thing about humans deciding at some point, like, yes, I exist in, my spiritual practice, and yes, I exist in this political realm of having citizenship somewhere, but I'm also central in my home. And so there's different places in which you are central. So yeah, and that too, of like deciding between which one am I, and it just like also resonates a lot because of Issa's situation with trying to like work out visas and like, who am I? What do I, and that being a real question of worth whenever that's called into question as to, whether or not you're allowed to enter into a place based on what you define as central. So for instance, being in partnership would be a lot more comfortable than what I'm considering doing. And what was interesting was I was riding back from a little class that I went to on composting recently here in Amsterdam. And when I was riding the train back, I kept looking in because people's apartments are far off in the distance. And I really wanted to see what was on their TV. Like, it was just like, I really wanted to watch TV. For some reason, I just really wanted that comfort of just being in their home and also seeing people like through their window, toasting, having dinner and this kind of thing. And just like really feeling that, oh, that is really nice too. Like, it's nice to go out on the adventure and nice to, carve a new space for yourself. But it's also really, I don't know, it does feel like there is that kind of decision that has to be made as to whether you go out in the world and conquer like Mars and Aries, because that's the pioneer. He's the, initiator, the warrior. That's his home sign. So when we think about Mars, that's the soldier. And in the sign of Aries, this is the first sign of the zodiac. It's fire. It wants to get out there.
When you were talking about the seeing in through people's windows, it brought back this really strong memory of coming home when I lived with Paul and Tom. And I come home in the evenings in the winter or in the autumn when the nights are early, and I'd come home and they would already be at home and the lights would be on, and I'd like be approaching the house and I could see the lights through the curtains and I could hear music, and sometimes I could see a little bit of movement in the gap between the curtains, and just being in this like really, and knowing like within a minute I'm going to be offered a glass of wine and asked how my day was, and like, but being in that pleasurable tension of like, I'm still outside where it's dark and cold and maybe a bit rainy and I've got my heavy bag and my coat, and like, but there is this welcoming place that I'm going to step into, and like almost wanting to prolong that moment of anticipation, because there's something so delightful about the anticipation of knowing that it's waiting for you. But obviously it can't be sustained. Like, this guy can't hang around on his porch forever. He has to go out or turn around and go home. But that moment of, I I know there's
That's
something really beautiful about that moment.
like I'm thinking of liminality in this porch being like this porous in between space, and then how that's where kind of rituals stand, and they are to get you to leave the porch. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, the word
Yeah.
that came to mind was suspended and suspense. And I do think that that is something that ritual helps you to face, is the horror and the terror of, or the joy, like the, just whatever it is that's on the precipice, like you can move through it with that relationship.
It's almost like the ritual provides maybe sometimes literally a circle of salt or chalk or whatever, so that you could stand in that in between space a little bit longer. Because you like what you do. Your ritual might be reaching out to the divine, but like you're still, feet of clay. You're still standing there in the mundane. So there's like and to maintain that pose without a sort of structure, a ritual structure to support you, is impossible. And it's impossible to stay in the circle forever, obviously. But that the beautiful thing about ritual is the way it creates that feeling of timelessness. So although you're only doing your ritual for however many minutes or hours, it does feel kind of eternal, especially if you're repeating the same rituals and coming back into the same space. And there's another thing that like connects to this guy. I'm thinking he's planning. I'm thinking this is the equivalent of like, looking at the Lonely Planet or something in his reality, just studying the globe, wondering about where he should go. And I feel like in ritual, often in many types of ritual, the idea is to lay down or to inscribe into yourself like a blueprint for action or something. Like, this is how I want to be, or this is how the world is, or whatever. You're manifesting that through yourself. So you're almost like, it's almost like an act of planning, because it's like planning who you're going to be or how the world is, or I don't know.
Both and.
Yeah.
No, I like that. I mean, because I've been noticing, and it seems like an obvious thing, and I don't know how I didn't get this thought earlier in my life. But I was thinking, because of this thing I mentioned earlier of my schedule being so weirdly changing and open, and also feeling like I need to provide my own structure. It's not something that's given to me. And so I remember like a couple of weeks or a couple of days feeling like, oh, I'm gonna work 8 hours a day. I'm gonna, stay until I take the last bus and stuff like that. And all the like the anxiety and stress that I would get just from thinking that, oh, today is a day where I have to work a lot or work hard. And then at some point it kind of hit me like, I cannot like, how can I say this? Like, there might be days where working overtime or working overnight makes sense, but I cannot do that every day. But for me to know what is overtime is what is too much, I need to have like a frame of reference. I need to have like a solid middle ground where I know, okay, today is a day where I can go beyond this. Just as today is a day where I can cut it early and be like, you know what, I'm gonna go home and rest. But that decision of deciding, hey, today is a day for pushing myself extra, or no, today is a day for taking it slow, cannot happen if I don't have that blueprint first. And I think what was happening to me is I was trying to work without that blueprint. I was like imagining full throttle every day without a reference for what full throttle means. And that just was very messy. So it's my different way of saying, I think that's what ritual do. It gives you that frame of reference for what is, in this case, too much or too little, but what is, in another way, what is going beyond it, what is staying within. If we go back to this metaphor of going out of way, is like that having a sense of that boundary in a way, right? That line of going beyond and staying within. For you to know what is beyond and for you to know what is within, you need to have that line.
Yeah.
And I think that's what ritual is. It's that line. And I think a lot of what is happening is that a lot of those lines are getting very blurred in current life, at least for me, which is why more and more ritual feels important, but more and more it's hard to navigate anything without having that. And also because it, at least to me, it gives me, I realize that's such a sense of agency. If I know that this is the line, I know when I can cross it and I know when I can stay tucked in. And it feels like it's my choice and it's something that I need to make in that moment based on my body and my environment and what is important at that moment. Like it's not something that I can decide the day before or the week before or whatever. And sometimes we do, because it's a bit modern life. We have to plan things, but yeah, I don't know. It was like a weird epiphany I had last week, and I was like, whoa, my life would be so much easier to handle, I think, if I set myself not like a super high thing, but just like this is the average that if I do, I'm happy with.
Mm.
And some days will be beyond and some days will be below. And when that moment comes and engaging with myself to make that choice, there's something really important there.
Yeah, I think actually like consciously choosing what the average is for you and what's like reasonable for you. Because I feel like I just did that by accident because Paul works like a normal 9 to 5 sort of thing. So I was like, well, I need to be working 9 to 5, my thing as well. But my thing is very different to his thing. And then on top of that, I have, whatever else I have to do in my life. And sitting and doing like kind of creative, inspirational, spiritual work 9 to 5 every day makes you a crazy person. So like I let that average be set by, well, I guess by him, but through our culture, right? Because that's like the factory mindset. You get into the factory at 9 and you sit and work till 5. Whereas actually probably what is more sensible for me is to do something more like what Isa's talking about, where you sense into what you're capable of today. And some days you can work till midnight and some days you can't do anything. But that's a hard revelation to make and hard to justify to myself, because like there's no one watching me, there's no one judging me, but in my head there's a whole arena of judges and watchers. Hate those guys.
Yeah, it reminds me when you were talking about like the sense of closing your eyes and how that takes away a lot of, I don't know, a big portion of it. And then that allows you to enter into a space, like especially for meditation, obviously. But then there's that whole practice of centering yourself and finding what it feels like in your body to be balanced and in a central place. And if you can just return to that space in your meditation practice, then that's something familiar that you can continue to be, just using as your homeostasis line. This is the level. This is things that I can veer away from, but it's nice to know this central space.
It's funny we're talking so much about sort of like this kind of earthy stuff when we're talking about a card in a fire suit. It's like, because fire's a bit scary. I don't know. Because that's the other way you can interpret this card. Like, oh, look at him, he's hesitating, maybe out of fear.
Mm.
Maybe out of a proper sense of timing.
Mm.
Mm.
The other notable thing about Aries that I was listening to your guy, Adam Ellenboss, how not to be afraid of Mars. It's a good video. He was talking about Mars being an actor of severance in a way.
Yep.
And it's a question of what it is we need to leave behind. I think that has a lot to do with ritual too, that sense of severance and that sense of stepping into stepping into kind of a larger identity than the one we inhabit now, in a way. And I also wonder too, I mean, that sense of closing one's eyes and talking a lot about kind of inner and outer and really defined spaces and things like that. But I also wonder, like, does it have to be that hard? The world is, at least some of this isn't resonating, and part of that, I think, is trying to step into a place where the way that I'm seeing is, I don't know how to describe this. It's I've been having this experience lately of going for these walks and this realization that this is a lot of Bonnie's work that I've been practicing of recognizing that the world is ingressing inside of me. So everything that I'm walking through is becoming part and parcel of, it's composing who I am. It's ingressing into my body. And then this really, and I feel that when I'm out, in particular, out in nature and on my land, it's very, very clear how the land has shaped me, the person I have become because of its, because it's a natural state. It's constantly disclosing itself. So naturally, but then I had this really wonderful realization that my being is ingressing into the land as well. So it's not just I'm becoming nature, it's actually the tree is being shaped and changed by my presence and my being, my way of being. And there's something now as I walk with that, in that way of seeing, there's a way for me to show up that feels responsible and caring, to where I want the tree and the bird and the grass and the fences and the doors to ingress not my neurotic shit, but I want it to ingress, like I want it to ingress my wholeness. And so I love ritual, and I'm also noticing that maybe I also don't need things to be as defined as sometimes I try to make them be, or like force like the sacred's just everywhere, and it's really more a matter of walking and being in a way where that's really obvious, or that's you're letting that light radiate out.
Well, sticking with themes of Mars, because you mentioned that the severance of Mars, and like, yeah, this is interesting because we were talking about like two decisions, and Mars cuts things away. So it cuts through the fat. It gets, it's very sharp. And also, Mars represents our externalized desire. So you were saying like that reciprocating relationship with external the external world. So where Venus is like how we internalize our desire and what we attract in and what's coming in, and that Mars energy is what we externalize, and how we plant flags on the world or this kind of thing, but also being in relationship with the world and realizing that doesn't, I don't have to define it with this flag. I don't have to stake something in here. Or something that I see a lot in Amsterdam is the weeping beech trees are carved into. People cut their names into them and carve their eternal love to someone in the tree. And I just like touch the bark of the tree, and I'm like, despite, this is named a weeping beech tree, but I can feel the pain of just representing this, eternality to someone or to something, like, yeah, like a fixed position of Jack loves Diane or whatever it would be in the Dutch equivalent. Like it's like the billboard for humans to put their, names on so that they can express love. But the life force of the tree is also Mars energy, and that it is externalized. Yeah, being like it's out and it's So I don't know. There was something too, like this is a little bit different, might take a little bit of a detour, but when I went to The Hague, and the difference in The Hague and Amsterdam is that The Hague is a lot of historic buildings and brick roads, and like I'm really fascinated by it. And we're going to be in Glastonbury, and that's also castles and like how humans assert themselves onto the world to be like, we are here and we are magnificent and this is the center of our being, and like I'm actually impressed by that. Like that like these structures that were, instilled in that way are actually really impressive because there's intention behind it. And, at some point they became forts, so it's more militant and very on point for Mars too, what's being expressed with forts versus things like castles or palaces. But just that desire, that ingenuity, that human endeavor of building for the purposes of just centralizing a place, it's pretty interesting too. But what you've brought forth is this kind of interrelationship of desire, also for the tree to be like holly.
Mm-hmm. And to be clear, I'm not saying like, oh no, like I don't like ritual. I love ritual. It's like it's not that. I hope I didn't communicate with that way of showing that kind of devotion or ingressing the world is so powerful and necessary. It keeps the wheel turning, really, I think. But also just sort of like, I think it speaks more to the beautiful note Rebecca left in my fridge that I see every day of Obledin, every moment and initiation. And so just carrying myself, trying to carry myself more in a way that where that becomes more constant or more of the default, hopefully.
When I was thinking about the idea of the link between ritual and planning, I was thinking about some anthropologists, I don't know who, talking about the earliest rituals, and his take was that they were all reenacting stuff, reenacting the beginning of the world, reenacting the passage of the sun, reenacting the movements of the planets, etc., etc. And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about sympathetic magic, the idea that you can do something in miniature and then it affects the thing. Like, so you get your little doll with Sarah's head on it, and then you give it a hug and she feels a hug, or whatever, depending on what mood you have with Sarah that day. Just as an example. But like,
hide your needles.
But like and so I was thinking, is that the early rituals that are reenactments of the cosmos in miniature, is that kind of a sympathetic magic type thing where they're like, let's keep everything in harmony. If we enact, and this is kind of what we're doing when we celebrate the turning points on the points of the wheel of the year, right? We're like, well, we'll celebrate it in miniature because that will keep everything, as Holly says, keep the wheel turning, keep everything in. So it's like, it's not necessarily like I have a plan, like a kind of typical contemporary ritual that like a sort of someone coming from a sort of new age direction might do, like where they've got their intention and they carve it on a candle or whatever, which is cool, but that's more like I've got my plan and I'm putting it into the world, whereas these earlier rituals are more like the world has a plan, I'm putting it into my body. And then the other thing that came to me when Holly was speaking, well, a mashup of Holly and Sarah, is traveling around and you see around the UK, and sometimes you'll go into a city or a town and everything just feels great, and sometimes you'll go into one and you're like, oh, this is horrible. And there are a million reasons why that might be the case, but one of the reasons I've noticed is when the buildings are made of local stone, I like it. And when they're made of this red brick, which I guess is, I don't know how it works economically, I guess it's cheap and it's easy to move around or whatever, it immediately kind of just puts me on edge. And when I, like here, we have a lot of chalk and therefore we also have a lot of flint. And when I see the flint in the church walls, like, oh, I just want to put my hand again, and it feels so right. And recently I went to Bath, and they have this grey stone up there, which is very typical of that region. So that's a more like, it's kind of like a compromise. Like, we have put buildings up. There are not buildings there naturally, but at least we've made them out of this local stuff. So yeah, I don't know, like something about that experience of walking through nature and feeling it within you and you within it translates into like literally how we build our cities and towns. Yeah.
Are we getting into Issa's territory with like built environment and that kind of thing?
That's interesting. Well, I was thinking, so now I'm in Bern, and Bern is exactly like that. All the historical downtown is all made with this like greenish stone. It's beautiful. It's like gray green, and all the buildings there are made with that. And there's something about it that feels so like, okay, yes, like in just the way like it adapts to the, because it's like, I don't know what you call that. Like, it's one of those little river loop things. It's like this little almost island, but it's not really an island. And it seems like the city just kind of goes with the terrain. And yeah, I think there is okay, is human intervention at that scale ever like right? I think it can be. I don't know. I think there's a way to see that. Okay, if nature is in me and and we're just making a pattern in a different way, and that would include making shelter for us and things for us. So I don't know. I think there is a way to make city that feels genuine and responsive and not just like this thing that was in some dude's head. I think that's the big difference. When it feels like something that has, and that's the part that I don't know, when we were talking earlier about how, oh, like we have made these big things to show human intention. And the thing is, I don't know how much that was just like some committee of people deciding what to do. I feel like a lot of it, especially those historical towns, is just little things that happen over so long of someone saying, oh, well, I like having a window here because I get better light and I can grow better my strawberries or whatever. And like how something like that and little things like that, like, oh, I like having the seat here because the wind blows nicely and it's a good place to have my coffee and whatever. And how those little things over and over build up like a room, and they build the building, and then they build up, and like someone who did this is what things will look like. It's just stuff that emerged from humans responding to the environment over and over. So yeah, but it is interesting to think to what extent it on a different level. It's also because I've been reading this book. I think I mentioned it at some point about like extinction events and stuff, and it's nice to think that like this chapter I'm reading, it's about the end of the Triassic, which was the time just before the dinosaurs, and how there was this like basically that's when America split from Eurasia, Africa, whatever, and that split in the continents led to like these crazy amounts of lava that basically it's where New York is now. Like all those cliffs are just from this specific basalt from the Triassic, and is basically what the guy says is like, we humans think that we're making these big cities is like, no, it's like, like the shell of the onion or less than that. It's just like from an earth geological scale, it's just like this tiny thin layer of constructed things that is nowhere near as resistant or strong or permanent as we think it is. Ooh. And when I think of it that way, I become more comfortable with the idea of us humans making shit, because okay, are we changing the world? Yes, we are. There's a lot of things that we're doing now that have significant consequences, especially when it comes to CO2 and stuff. But at the same time, it's not as deep or thick Like if I think of the earth as layers, like the human layer is so thin.
Mhm. That's interesting. I've been like obsessing about ants, kind of like they've just captured my attention, and I've just been like, what the fuck's going on with the ants? They apparently make my front porch a graveyard because they carry their dead. They get so many that are dead. So it's kind of beautiful though. There's a ritual almost of like the ants taking their deceased to a little graveyard, and that's my front porch. I was like, wow, what's happening underneath my feet? Like, there's just this tiny little hole, and thousands of little ants are constantly coming and going out of that. So I found this video of like someone who had excavated in Brazil, like this ant colony, and it was like, holy fucking shit. It was like they were basically comparing it to like the Great Wall of China. Like this thing was like, this ant colony was so complex and expensive, and like secret portals and little bathrooms, like all kinds of. And there's like 10 quadrillion ants. So apparently, what I read too was that they consume like 100 times more than humans, actually, of biomass than humans, but they make it a net positive, so that it's like somehow they're able to use it, compost it in a way to where it's a net positive for nature. So it was just this, we can learn from the ants, And one thing, this idea just sort of popped that's really kind of orthogonal, but it relates back to what Isa and you guys were talking about of like the porch and that liminality, right? Like especially ritual being this place of liminality. And this thought popped up that was like, what if ritual and that like time of devotion to the sacred is the normal, and actually our kind of everyday life is liminality? I just wanted to throw that in space.
I've heard or read, people talking about, like there's that guy, the bicameral brain guy, who says like our brains worked in a completely different way, and I can't remember what his name is, and I'm pretty sure he's widely discredited now, but it's an interesting idea, right? That when the Greeks and the Romans say they heard the voice of God, he claims that they literally heard like what sounded to them like an audible voice, because, and I'm probably mangling this, but basically like the left and the right hand side of the brain were less connected back then, and so they experienced the input of the right hand side of the brain as if it was an external force, an external voice. So what really struck me about this idea, it's a really cool idea, but like the fact that the way our brains work now might not be the way they've always worked, because like
yes.
I have this tendency
Yes.
to, project back onto the past. Yeah. And so what you're saying about maybe the liminal, what we experience as liminal or sacred or ritual space or whatever being the norm, I think that's perfectly plausible and a really interesting, because who's to say what we experience as normal now is normal, like normal consciousness. And when you hear people talk, like people from traditional societies talk about their experience of the world, it sounds to my ears like they're having some kind of connection with the sacred that I only access in a special state, but they're having it all the time. And it makes me think of like all the stories of the fall, and separation from something. And maybe all those myths are hinting at this different state, which is what Owen Barfield would talk about as participatory consciousness or something. Like he's saying the same thing from a different route. So yeah, I really like that, and it made me feel, when you said it, Holly, it made me feel like part of me just like went, yes. Maybe I never have to leave my circle.
Well, it's interesting too, because like a lot of what I'm kind of gathering or gleaning is this kind of adaptability, the assimilation, like the ability to adapt to always there being possibilities. So that going back to like the Two of Wands, where like maybe there isn't such a distinction between the two options, but just maintaining that ability to be adaptable to the options, staying in that liminal space, always providing yourself with that ritual space so that you are just more adaptable. And for some reason that was coming up with like, I don't know, like looking at this globe and considering the long term while also keeping in mind the short term. And, you know, there's just something about having the will to push forward, like Mars and Aries, but also like just maintaining that ability to stay open. And yeah, that was coming up too with like the ants and how they build like, okay, well, this is going to be the bathroom or this is going to be the kitchen, you know, not necessarily that those would be actual places, but when building and constructing and having intention behind things, and it's all as a result of what's being fed back to me based on the environmental situation or based on whatever feedback I'm getting from the other, that staying adaptable, that's what I'm kind of getting with this Two of Wands is like, I need to be able to move in both directions with whatever is presented to me.
Well, here's my question. I love that, Sarah. Is he holds the globe in his hand, like you're saying? So why does he need to move at all? Like, it's just a question I'm sort of posing of like, man, he already possesses the world in some regards. Why is the image drawn that way? Like, he already holds the world in his hands. Yeah.
It makes me think when I was preparing to go traveling, for like the first big traveling we ever did, and we got we had one of those tickets that takes you all over the place. So like we had like, you know, everywhere, like across Africa and Asia, and like all the flights are pre-booked because that's the cheapest way to do it, at least it was back then. And I went to my local library and I got out all the Lonely Planets and I photocopied the relevant pages of places I wanted to go because I couldn't afford to buy the books because they were super expensive. And some of the Lonely Planets were super out of date. And then I put them all together and made myself my own book. And then traveling around the world and coming to the end of a page of my photocopied material and realizing like I had half of the details on this temple, but not the rest. And the rest had like the directions or something really important or like whatever. Or I just like, and I feel like this is like the photocopied pages. This is his model of the world. And he thinks he's got it all because he's photocopied all the pages of the relevant places and put them all together. So he's like, I'm ready to go out and do Dominion, which is the name of the card in the Thoth. And I think that's one of the things like that we're kind of having problems with discussing or like not resonating with fully with this card, Dominion, because that doesn't come across in Holly's card from the Gentle Tarot. So that's probably an evolution of the card through time. This one being the oldest, going to this. Well, that's Crowley. He's you know, a man unto himself. But that's what I think when I see. Yeah, Holly, can you say something so it comes up?
Yeah, do you see it? Sorry. So yeah, it's a beautiful naked woman who's like climbing up a mountain, and again, her interpretation is, you know, trusting and creating your own path.
That sounds much more like what you're up to when you're walking in nature than this guy striding off with his plans, you know, going to inflict them on the world. Maybe I'm being a bit harsh on what but you know.
And I kind of want to talk about what the penis means in some ways.
Oh, please. Tell us, Holly.
I don't know. Yeah, yeah. What does the penis mean? Represent? Do?
The generative principle.
Yes.
I'm trying to remember what she says in The Wicker Man. Because, you know, that's the question. Like, and all the little girls are sitting there in the school, and she's like, and of course, what does the maypole represent, girls? And like, a phallic symbol.
The cop's just like, oh my God. And it pops and it shrinks, you know, it's like a mushroom. Mushrooms come out at night. Penetrate the soil, come out, and then they can kind of. So it has this ability to retract.
It's interesting that it's so vulnerable.
Yeah.
Like, it's generally represented as an instrument of power, and yet, like, it's the place that is going to hurt a guy the most. Well, if we're including testicles, but I'm sure it's not nice just to be kicked in the dick either.
And it's soft and delicate.
Yeah.
There was this part in Braiding Sweetgrass where she's talking about the word papawi, or I think that would be, I don't know exactly what it is. But there's that word that her native language would have had, which was the force of the mushroom to push through that last little bit of soil before it emerges. And so that was something that's interesting, is like the only way that this word was even part of the language was because there was people outside observing this happening. Like, scientists never captured this word. There was no word in Latin or science that described that last little push that it takes to get through the soil. And I just think there's something that I really appreciate about the observation, because that also seems to me to be, I don't know, not necessarily masculine, but just kind of like things manifesting and, like, I don't know, the puncturing eye, like just like seeing something, observing something, witnessing something that's naturally occurring, already happening, like the natural flow. I guess because like my relationship with the observer really started with science, and just when you observe a part, or when you observe a light, it becomes, or a photon, it becomes either a particle or a wave, or that kind of thing. So I don't know, that was something that was just coming up, was that word Pupawi, or whatever it is, and how in order for that to have been part of their language, it had to be something witnessed.
Beheld. It's beautiful.
Yeah, beheld. That's nice. Yeah, and it kind of like takes me back to that globe, like witnessing the globe, and just like, yeah, it's, I don't know, there's something about that. There's a plan in that, the blueprint. Yeah, I don't know.
It's a bit, I think there's a lot of overlap, even if it's a bit of a different example. But I remember hearing this talk from, I don't know, there was this thing, I remember hearing this in school, and in, I guess it was everywhere, the podcast, especially when it comes to psychology, but I think in science in general, like everyone having a crisis with the replicability crisis, and everyone is like calling everyone a fake because they try to replicate an experiment and the same results don't happen. And immediately what people are doing is like, oh, that person clearly faked their results, or they faked their process, or they did something off. But this guy at a talk was saying, what if everything was exactly the same, but we didn't get the same results because clearly there are things at play that were not made explicit. Clearly there are things at play that the first scientist who made that experiment was not aware of. So it's interesting that our first reaction is to call everyone a liar, or to say that things are not rigorous enough. Maybe they are rigorous as can be, and there's just so much that we cannot account for because it's not being beheld. So he was seeing it as like, don't see this as a terrible thing. Maybe see this as proof that the world and the universe is infinitely more complex than we are able to restrain for an experiment. I thought that was interesting. It's I think it speaks to the same thing from the other side of like how, yeah, I guess how sometimes we struggle with the things that are that if something is not aware, then suddenly it's a lie.
Well, there's a through line too, Isa, with what you mentioned before about your schedule and trying to one day like more routine, one day more flexibility. And I think the word that comes up for me around all that is context. And so context matters, you can't put anything into a vacuum. And we don't know what energy there's energies constantly moving and flowing and getting accumulated in some areas, and so this whole process of gathering and then dispersing, and so context, right? With these experiments that are irreparable, whatever, fuck, you can't repeat them.
Literally.
Word, some word. In another context, a whole another word. But yeah, there's something that's sort of demanding that in that I think that we behold, witness, acknowledge, bring forth what Bonnie calls this latent potency, this hidden power, and how that power is always changing based on bodies moving in space. And so context matters. It's kind of too long didn't read context matters.
It just makes me think of, like in a science experiment, they call them the controls, and like controls and dominion. It feels it's like the scientist is trying to exert dominion over everything, because then they've got a nice tight experimental situation and they know nothing's interfering. And we all know how impossible it is to control everything. But that's that's the dream. That's the dream with the girl with the photocopier and the plans of what she's going to do. Like I'll do these things. I planned it all out. I won't need the rest of the book.
That's so interesting. So she's holding the globe in that card, but she's actually walking in the world as is. One. Yeah.
And what's she holding?
She's holding the branches, basically. I think they're either wheat or there's they're these like little branches that are flower. I don't know. Anyways, but she's holding a plant or a branch.
Oh, but they're the two ones.
Yeah, that's her one. That's her depiction of the
She's
wands.
taking them both with her.
Mm-hmm.
So she's not making this decision between inner and outer. She's able to take them both with her on her journey.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Beautiful. Let's rip up this card.
Throw dominion over.
I just want to say quickly, because we talked about penises before. No, because Holly, you just said context, and my sigil for context looks pretty much, honestly, like a vagina. Like, I didn't plan it that way.
Can we see it?
But it looks a lot. I can draw it real quick.
Okay, yeah.
So I thought that was an interesting, because we were talking first about the penis, now the vagina comes.
What does?
Well, I mean, that's a very typical interpretation of like the phallus as the agent and the yonic symbol as the context in which the agent situates itself.
The receptive.
Again and again and again.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Now, Issa, do you have a sigil that looks a lot more phallic? I'm curious.
Ascension looks very phallic.
Interesting.
Sure. Yeah.
It's the first one that comes to mind. I need to think more, but I think there's a few of them that have a lot like a drive, like responsibility and will and stuff like that. But I think Ascension is the one that looks the most like literally like an erect thing trying to move upwards.
The Paupi is, or the Paup thing that Sarah was saying.
Yeah.
I was thinking about thinking of penises made me think of, and this card made me think of lightning, because the Dorje, that thing is the lightning bolt, right? And lightning fructifies, but it also destroys, which is my experience of penises.
And in the I Ching, or the I Ching, the thunder over thunder is called the arousal, the arousing. It's like, it's shock. It's shock. And of course, Zeus is also really associated with lightning. Yeah, there's something coming up for me about like with lightning, again, rate of change, and again, that shock where it can change things so quickly, or when you think of enlightenment or a lightning bolt, like getting struck by a lightning bolt, an insight that comes, and all of a sudden the world you're seeing things from a totally different perspective or dimension. So it has that ability to create space in a way, or at least be able to widen one's way of seeing or light up one's way of seeing. I've like heard that in myths, of like, right, like the lightning coming, and that's the moment the person wakes up, or that's the moment that the world changes, and it can kill you. Yeah. If you've never been stuck in a lightning storm, it's like, fuck, yeah, you don't. It engenders a lot of humility, and also it's terrifying.
Yeah.
And it's about the tension between opposites, isn't it? Because it's like the positive and negative charge rushing towards each other.
The magnetism.
Mm.
And it's heat, it's plasma, it's like this suit, it's like the, solid liquid gas plasma, and then the fifth one is like the Bose something. It's like infinitely tiny, but the plasma is it's like really intense heat, state change.
Yeah. And fire, more fire.
Mm-hmm.
Or electric anyway. Could cause fire. Flammable.
This might be a total curveball, but it's kind of coming up too is like wands versus swords in a way. They're shaped.
Me too. Yeah, it's been
right.
Yeah.
And normally when I get a swords cards, I'm like, no. It's like, oh fuck. But the wands is exciting, but it's really interesting actually how the wands also have this intense danger to. I mean, the sword is dangerous, it has its ability to cut and to sever, but the wand feels a little bit more like magician. It has a little bit more. It's a different kind of. It arouses a different kind of energy. That's for me, it'll be a little less fear based, but it's that's just my own projection of relationship with swords. But anyways, it's just interesting that they're kind of similar shapes and powerful tools.
The wand is just so much more organic. It feels like it's just arising naturally as a response to the world, whereas the sword actually feels more like dominion in many ways to me. Again, I don't have the most positive relationship with the swords cards, but I'm working on it. But they're traditionally thought of as the masculine suits, right? I can't find it quickly enough. I don't know what the two swords look like.
I don't have a photocopy of it. And this woman, talks about two being like, she has a whole, words are just not coming out, but she associates each of the numbers with like a different quality. And so two is union. And you've talked about two, Rebecca, like two high priestess, like you can revert it back also to the major arcana. Let me find the swords. Two of swords. Oh, we've done that one. That was the one where she's blindfolded. It's like the high priestess. She's blindfolded, and she has the swords across her chest,
right on the edge again, on the edge of the sand and the water. Yeah,
exactly. And in her interpretation, it's like she's blind, but she doesn't want to kind of face the trouble yet. She's not ready, and she's protective, and in that same inward move, like as the high priestess of kind of the.
It is interesting how in that one it's kind of like I can't face it, where in this one that we're looking at, it's like, okay, I'm facing it, and there's some courage. There's that fire element to it. It's like we're gonna move forth, but it's still kind of indecisive.
Which makes sense, because if like one is the kind of the seed, like the beginning of the story, and then the two is like, will I, won't I, am I going to go for it, and then as we go on through the numbers, shit gets real.
And if two is union, then there's that oscillation. It hasn't unified yet, right? So it really is that oscillation of trying to synthesize the two.
Yeah, I'm just thinking. And I don't know. I mean, it's just the word union has also come up recently. We had this very recently, a very interesting talk about brooches and the history of them, which, okay, this is a tangent, but I thought it was interesting. Apparently, it's really only a Mediterranean thing. Only Europeans came up with brooches, and they were just to pin clothes together. So the lady was explaining, like, we don't know if we were just not stupid enough to figure out another way to get dressed. Or it was something about maybe the heavy clothing, because she said in Asia they just stuck things in, or they had ribbons or ties, or like they didn't need like an external metal thing holds things together, which I thought was interesting. But anyway, that was a tangent. She's now writing a book about connections. So how you connect things. This is specifically jewelry, but I thought it was interesting because she also talks about the idea of union and how you have different kinds of union. So it's like union from things that started from the same thing. So she was talking about this traditional sort of chain or necklace that is made somewhere where they just carve like an elephant tusk. But it's so you get a chain in the end, but it's all carved from the same tusk. It's not like different pieces that you hold together. It's carved in a way that once you release like the little, the little links, they all came from the same. So of course it starts big and they go small, so small because they all came from the same tusk. Or how you have union from like you have things that will seem separate, but then you connect them through a third concept or like these kind of things. Like, I don't know, she has a whole list of different types of unions. So I guess that's why I brought it up. Because I think it's also interesting to see like, yeah, union because things look similar, union because things look different. Like there's so much contradiction also in what union can be. Union from things that started from the same place, union from different things that you connect through a different medium. It's very interesting just of its own.
Yeah, that's the thing about, because if you're the person making the chain from the elephant tusk and you've got your tusk to start with, you wouldn't say this is unified. You'd just be like, it's a tusk. But when you get all the links in, then it becomes something that's unified, which is weird. So it's like, I guess unity relies on separateness or the illusion of separateness, the creation of the illusion of separateness.
Yeah, for sure.
The word that's coming up for me is continuity.
Yeah, that takes us back to like thinking about that space that you return to for meditation or for ritual, the continuity of that, returning back to that same place or felt sense.
And everything outside that space is all different and crazy, and like every day is an adventure and a mystery and a nightmare. But the space inside your sweet head when your eyes are closed is wonderful. So I'm just thinking about what Holly was saying about maybe that is the primary space and the outside world is the secondary space, or like that's that space of feeling in union and in like in the sacred. Because there is a kind of weird sameness to it, like the same sensations come up in my body, and like there's a felt sense to like, oh, now I'm in ritual, and I know I am because I can go through a checklist of this is how it feels in my body right now, and yeah.
Yeah, that centrality of that wand and how your whole world is wrapped around that central space.
It feels like for me, being someone who was brought up with very, very little ritual, and then obviously coming to it and being like just in love, it's like a coming home. That's what it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then now we can connect it to dominion because the origin of the word dominion is home.
Oh,
it's domus, which means home.
Wow, that's so much more beautiful than like the associations I have with dominion now.
And it's cool because Sarah made this move like this with the wand, which made me think of like stirring a cauldron, and like that cauldron being the home, and then the stirring, the wand being the mixing of it, and the disperse, like letting those elements sort of create difference or create new forms or to mix and stir around together. But it's all located in this unchanging kind of home.
Which does take me back to that same book where it was also mentioned that not just the staff that connects the heavens and the earth, but also thinking of it more as a navel, as a central location.
Yeah.
Which connects the inner and the outer.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Bam! Wand drop.
Yeah.
We did it.
We made some fucking soup. What were you saying? Something?
We're always making.
No, I was just going to reference the Wicker Man again because it's fresh in my mind because it's not that long since May Day. They have the umbilical cord hung on the tree of the dead girl, and he's like, "What's this disgusting thing here?" And he's like, "Well, it's her. I can't remember what he calls it, but her umbilical cord. Where else would it be but on her tree?" I just thought, what a lovely tradition. I don't know who does that now, like what cultures that's common in, to keep the umbilical cord.
Well, you can bury it like in Aboriginal and in Hawaii. That's pretty common. Actually, to take the placenta and bury it on a tree, and then the tree's DNA and your DNA intertwine. And so now you're forever part of that tree has your own DNA and blood in it, which is quite a beautiful thing. Right?
And now, not that this is culturally, but people will save the umbilical cord because it has undifferentiated cells in it. The stem cells of the umbilical cord, they don't know what they want to do. So you could just keep them because if there's any kind of, anything in the future for the child or, whomever is going to use those stem cells, they're undifferentiated cells in that umbilical cord. So that's pretty cool.
I love that. I feel like that's another way of saying it's a sacred object, just in science language instead of in whatever language.
Papawi.
And it's that thing again of like the Irminsul, the world tree, being a macrocosm of our own spine and our own and then being the umbilical cord between us and whatever the other world.
Oh, it's so true. Yeah.
Oh, I wish I had my umbilical cord.
Damn it. To do
the things I do.
It's the labyrinth. It's the land. Yeah. Like, I mean, that's, I think place is that umbilical cord.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful.
Chalk.
Wow. Thinking of the labyrinth as an umbilical cord that's trippy. I love that. I really love that. I mean, that's literally trippy. Like, I think I would like to go on an active imagination journey, a trip.
It's kind of shaped like a belly button in its own,
Yeah.
It is.
Oh, this is completely reframed ones for me.
Totally. I know. We definitely aroused some good stuff, it feels like. Right. Does this feel like a good resting place?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. That was great. Oh, I love talking to you guys.